Equality is good for all Americans.
But the Equality Act is not.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm so very glad you've joined us today for this discussion regarding the Equality Act. But before we get into that, I would like for you to meet our panelists. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
Hi, I'm Carl Troval. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. I serve as senior minister at First Christian Church, downtown Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I'm the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I serve as senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And my name is Mel Robeck. I'm an Assemblies of God minister who serves my church as senior professor of church history and ecumenics and special assistant to the president for ecumenical relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California.
All right, thank you everyone for being here today. Looking forward to this discussion, and thank you for tuning in today. Glad to have you here. And if this is your first time coming to the Town Hall, a very special welcome to you. We know that we pick up viewers periodically, and I think you're going to enjoy what we do here at the Town Hall. At least I hope you do. Let's get into our subject for today. In 1993, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which protects the religious exercise of individuals and institutions. On May 17, 2019, however, the U.S. House of Representatives, by a vote of 236 to 173, passed the Equality Act. Currently, every federal action that substantially burdens religious freedom is subject to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The Equality Act removes these protections, stating that, quote, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 shall not provide a claim concerning or a defense to a claim under a covered title or provide a basis for challenging the application or enforcement of a covered title, close quote. The result is that areas of law where encroachment or religious freedom are most likely to occur would become areas where religious freedom is least protected. It holds implications for churches, religious schools and colleges, physicians and hospitals, and faith-based service organizations. In light of these issues, we would like our panelists to consider at least these three questions. First of all, does this look like a good faith attempt to reconcile competing differences? Another question, do you view it as an attempt by one side to empower those who oppose religious freedom while causing critical damage to the free exercise clause? And then finally, how should people of faith concerned with religious freedom issues respond to such legislation? Well, that is our subject for today. Let's go back to those who helped to start the program. We had some opening statements made first by Bishop Olson and then Reverend Plumley. So Bishop Olson, more thoughts on the subject, please.
Certainly. Equality is a good thing, and it's one of the values that we have as Americans, and even a value that we've taken and shared with the rest of the world. And one of the aspects of equality that sometimes we can overlook is that equality requires differences. And with differences comes an authentic pluralism, where each in their own differences of opinion are able to make a contribution to the common good and are able to engage in a discussion, that we can only find those things which unite us by having a conversation that includes things where we have differences of opinion. I think that the Equality Act, as so called, is an effort in some way to make our religious differences homogeneous, to introduce a false homogeneity, whereby, in a sense, that we take religion and isolate it only to a freedom of worship. And what takes place on our particular days of the Sabbath or of worship for God, and isolates us away from our religious expression and also the religious underpinnings of our services to our neighbor, and instead burdens religion then, making it only an area of concept or thought. And I think that the Equality Act, I don't know whether it's made in good faith or not, I couldn't say that, but I would say it has harmful effects in areas like social outreach, in areas like prenatal services, in areas of adoption that would involve a child, from our Catholic perspective, a child's right to be to have access to father and mother and the integrity of family life as well. It's also with regard to the basic right to life as well. So equality requires differences and pluralism and a freedom to express one's religious thought by how they live their lives.
All right, thank you very much. And now, Reverend Plumley, further thoughts on your opening statement?
Thank you. I'd simply stand up for the principle that we are given all sorts of freedoms in this country, but the freedom to discriminate is one that has always proved to be problematic, and we should not be affecting the freedoms that people have by other people exercising their religious freedom in a way that keeps people from having the same chance at getting a job, that keeps people from being able to get put a roof over their heads, have good housing, or that keeps someone from receiving services that, were they a different kind of person, would be open to them. So I simply want to stand up and say, yes, we are free to exercise our religion, but where that runs up against the possibility of discriminating against someone, we should not be free to discriminate.
And you put your finger right on the issue, I think. I think both of you in your opening statements. Dr. Luxton, welcome to the program, and your thoughts on the subject, please.
You know, I think when you talk about two goods and two things that are good, equality is good, religious freedom is good. I think we need to be careful to not compromise either. If you have a model, you have a kind of 1 to 10 pole of equality and 1 to 10 pole of religious freedom, we should be aiming at a 10-10, ideally. I mean, that's where we should be aiming. And that always is complex. It's always going to give us some kind of tension between those two worlds. It seems to me that the Equality Act is trying to bring a compromise or push one over against the other, and I think that is problematic. I do think that the ideal of religious identity and religious freedom within that is really, really critical to the kind of country we're living in. For people to have and believe and create an environment for others who believe the same, I think is really important. So I wouldn't, and that in itself is an equality. That this group can have that, but this group can't have that. I mean, how do you manage that? So it's not a simple issue. I think this tries to push the boundaries one direction, and that's why I'm uncomfortable with it.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Robeck. Glad to have you here to the program, and your thoughts on the subject.
Well,
please.
it's good to be here. I think this is a really problematic act that the House of Representatives has passed. It's not yet gone to the Senate, to my understanding, but the process is on. And I'd take us back to the original Act in 1993, Restoration Act, the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, that was a push by Chuck Schumer and Ted Kennedy and signed by Bill Clinton. And it really had to do at that particular time with Native American rights and what rights were being taken, religious rights were being taken away from them because of government intrusion on sacred grounds or local precepts taking place over that. Also, the peyote question was part of that. That was part of their religious rights and so forth. So, at that time and since that time, the court has basically held that the government must prove that there's a compelling interest to override the religious requests there, and they must prove also that it's the least restrictive kind of means of furthering their agenda. So I think those are fairly clear. What this particular thing does is it adds this idea that it's really an amendment to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which basically is adding that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and so forth is disallowed. It's a form of discrimination that will no longer be allowed. When schools and churches have statements of faith or standards of living, marriage between a man and a woman, or when adoption agencies say we will only allow an adoption to take place with certain people, or when a hospital says we will not perform abortions or whatever, there is this kind of discriminatory question that's being taken care of. So what's happening then is that the hospitals can be sued, the churches can be sued, the federal funding in loans and grants that students get at schools can be completely taken away. All of those are punishments for anybody who disagrees with this particular way of looking at things, which I think is really very difficult. China has, for a couple of decades, opened up a printing house which is printing thousands and thousands of Bibles. And that's a good thing, and we've always said that's a good thing. It's an older translation, but it's not bad. But what I understand now from friends who have just recently been there is that the Chinese government is working with the Three Self movement to retranslate the Bible in such a way that the Bible says nothing that would counter what the government might say. In other words, there's this ability or a desire to control everything around it. And I think this is really a move in the same kind of direction.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Trovall. Your thoughts on the subject?
Well, I appreciate what you had to say there, and I mean what everyone's had to say. And I just think that this is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I understand what they're trying to correct, but I think it's just too heavy-handed, and it ultimately will be deleterious, bad for those of us who support religious freedom. I want to jump on something that you said, Michael, and that is about people of faith. Generally speaking, I think our society looks at compartmentalization of religious life, whereas internally those of us of faith see our practice of faith as something that's holistic, something that is involved in a very thick way, not a thin way, in every part of our life. And for me, to try to legislate is a thin way of addressing something that we richly and deeply and thickly live as Americans. And I think this is to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis with general principles, not in whole-handed acts like this, which I think is going to do more damage than good.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Matthews. Welcome to the program.
It's good being here.
Yes, and your thoughts?
Good being here, and I appreciate all the comments that were made. And I, too, think that this act is harmful. And I appreciate Mel going into some of the more details that the act delineates. And I appreciate what the Bishop mentioned about the differences in terms of our religious opinions. But in addition to that, the act also is trying to, as I understand it when I read it, is trying to remove distinctions with genders. And I think that's extremely problematic, which would lead to as some of the research I did, is that they would really remove certain genders having exclusive use to public accommodations, and that's just, I just don't understand why someone would even want to push and to and have an act like that. And I think there are several court cases right now where young teenagers are suing because they are walking in locker rooms and they may have, you know, a transgendered person in there and they feel uncomfortable. The medical professional field, they would be sued, as was mentioned earlier, because of deeply held moral and religious convictions if they do not perform certain transition procedures. So I think the act is, I think it's a bad act.
All right, thank you. And we can see the subjectivity of it as we've been talking and listening around the table here. This is not an easy issue. We want everyone's rights to be protected and everyone having the freedom to be able to express themselves. But inevitably, as we know, that's going to bump into somebody else's right or perceived rights, and that's, of course, where the courts get involved. So, Bishop Olson, you'd help start us out. Further thoughts on this as it relates to the influence of the church. How can we help through this process?
This is in many ways a new ground on which conversation takes place, and I think one of the areas that I think is a very big question is particularly in the area of those women who have fought for rights, legitimate rights, equal pay for equal work. Those distinctions, as far as with the distinct characteristic beyond simple biology of being a woman, and the blurring or eradication of gender distinctions, or at least the subjectivizing of them entirely, I think. It does harm, or at least at the very least changes those understanding of rights in that particular movement on behalf of women and women's rights, beyond just even simply those that are biologically determined. I think that's something very new, and I think that discussion that goes on within that community it needs to be heard as well.
And historically, we're stepping into new territory now. Now that the playing field has been, shall we say, expanded, if not made unlevel from one side to the other. And wending our way through that in the courts is going to continually be a challenge, wouldn't you think? And so where do we go with this? Reverend Plumley, further thoughts on this?
Well, frankly, I think the courts are where it should be taken up. I would differ with several folks on the panel about how the rights of LGBTQ folks are handled. My concern with this tends to be more along the lines of what Dr. Trovall was talking about, that you can't legislate this sort of thing, where it's very difficult to cover it legislatively without at the same time setting in stone, more or less, some hindrances to other freedoms. But I do think that it is wrong to discriminate against folks because of their gender identity or because of their sexual orientation in the areas of work and housing and in the denial of services. I don't want anybody who's in need, regardless of what they look like or who they love or what their birth certificate says about their gender, to go into a doctor and have the doctor say, go away, I can't serve you because you're this certain kind of person.
And this goes back, I think, what Dr. Trovell was saying a moment ago, case by case. Every case is going to be nuanced. There are going to be some differences.
Yeah, I mean, for example, someone comes in, they're injured in a car wreck and they're gay. I don't think that any hospital, whether religious or not, they have an obligation to serve this person because their goal is the healing of the human body. And so, or discriminatory practices in business. That's why I like the spirit of what they're trying to get at here, but I just don't think that a single act just somehow magically just covers it and now the problem's solved.
It's not going to be perfect. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. But there are some summations. We can still get to what you might want to say and didn't have time in this segment. But we're going to take a break here for a few moments. We'll be back in just a few moments after this important announcement.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark. And I do thank you for writing. We do receive cards and letters from our viewers. Sometimes our viewers go to the website and send emails through that means. However you choose to get to us, please do so and make some suggestions concerning the subjects you'd like to hear discussed around this table. We're going to go to our summary statements now, and for that we begin with Dr. Trovell. You're first.
I am opposed to the Equality Act. I appreciate its spirit only because I know people who are gay, lesbian, who have been discriminated against, and I think that they deserve the protection of the law for that, and I think it needs to be addressed primarily on a case-by-case basis.
All right, thank you. Now, Bishop Olson.
I'm also against the Equality Act because I think it really blurs distinctions among people, those aspects that help us to be human, each in our own differences, which also, I think the Equality Act also harms us for being able to contribute in a pluralistic society, and it imposes unnecessary burdens on religions in their expression for ministry and service to the common good.
Thank you very much and for your participation today. Dr. Luxton, your summation.
I go back to the importance of freedoms. And I think that when you look at equalities, you're trying to bring freedom to everybody. But I think if we're not careful, we can swing and take freedom away from one person while we give it to another. I know it's kind of on a different scope, but, you know, I mean, my original background is from England, and I look at the days where you had one king in power, and you'd swing to one view, and everyone under that who didn't support that, your head's off. And then a few years later, you'd swing back, and it would be the opposite, and you just swing and swing and swing and swing. And I think the danger when we have politics at the front is that we can also have that swinging. And in that swinging, sometimes we actually lose some things that are good. And we need to make sure that in trying to resolve one issue, we don't actually swing and lose other things that are actually very good, that we need to keep.
Thank you, Dr. Luxton, and we're glad you're here in the U.S., by the way.
Not having my head put on top.
For a lot of reasons. Dr. Robeck.
When I think about this act, I'm most concerned about churches and church-related schools. I suppose I could say the same thing about adoption agencies that are run by churches, but any kind of church-related thing. Churches should have the right to teach and believe and to teach what they believe. Anybody who attacks that, takes away that right, penalizes the church or church-related institution for teaching and believing what it does, then they have trampled religious freedom completely. I think we have an enormous amount to lose in this particular act, and I'm not for discriminating against anybody, but I do think that we have the right to the freedom of religion and the freedom of belief in this country, and it should be sustained.
All right, thank you. Well stated. And then Dr. Matthews, your summation,
Yeah,
please.
I agree that we should not have any form of discrimination at all. I also humbly would submit that it'd be great if folks would watch and maybe log into what's titled the Inequality of the Equality Act. I think that's basically what this is about. I think it's a bad act. I think it's a bad policy, and we hope it doesn't pass. And at the same time, we hope we can just love people and treat them with dignity and respect. But I think this is a bad act, and it's just not a good thing.
All right, thank you very much. And now, Reverend Plumley, your summation.
Thank you. You guys better watch it, or you're going to drive me to be in favor of the Equality Act. Just simply because we got too much agreement here around the table. And so I guess I'll satisfy myself
It's
with...
okay. You're going to make it through.
I'll satisfy myself with an appeal to the fact that legislation doesn't solve all problems. I think this legislation was driven by some bad judicial decisions and some fears about the way that the Supreme Court is leaning. In fact, it's tilted completely out of balance. And Congress wanted to do something about that. The House of Representatives wanted to do something about that. Things like the wedding cake case and things like that, where it was made plain that LGBT folks could be discriminated against freely. And that's a far cry from not letting a school or a religious institution teach its theology and its beliefs about gender and about sex. So I think still the best place to deal with problems that arise is in the courts. But I will stand up and say that folks need to be able to get a job, need to be able to get a house, need to, if you're putting yourself out there to provide services to the community, that means all of the community.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you each one for being here today. And by the way, the panelists do disagree from time to time, so make no mistake about that. Go to the archives and you'll also see where there are disagreements. Not that that's the goal, but it is the goal here at the Town Hall to share perspectives. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy, and the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And so now, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.